My name's Nancy Connors. Welcome to Unity of Dallas. Once again, you have found your way to our Ancient Wisdom class. This class started a little over a year ago, and we have covered some basic topics, but no topic's ever really finished. We're just always looping back, and one of my challenges is to connect the dots for you. And as I find new material, and then I try to bring it in and incorporate it. I told Derek yesterday, Derek came to our house as a guest with Tom's son about a year and a half ago. And they both talked about moving to Dallas instead of living in Las Vegas because they're professional poker players. Yeah, Derek has hidden talents. So anyway, Tom's son hasn't made the move yet, but Derek has, and he's been living with us ever since. So it's worked out beautifully for us to have him in the household, somebody that knows how to work the internet and our phones and all the things that we struggle with. So I could not do this and record these classes without Derek. And he edits and puts all the visuals in and all these things that are just wonderful. And I told him last night, I'm learning as much from him and from all of you as maybe you're learning a few little tidbits from me. So that's the symbiotic relationship in these studies. And Tom and I recently, we're bridge players, and we 2 or 3 weeks ago, we were in Vermont for a 5-day workshop on bridge and bidding, and we'd never seen this man that taught it, and he was wonderful, fabulous teacher. And I was really kind of shocked at what he said. He brought us together to kind of get organized the night before we started, and he said, when you leave here, you'll know nothing. And I thought, what? But you know what? I understand. I kind of feel that way about this material. Every time I find a new source with material that I don't know, my mind goes, psh, and I'm trying to connect it. You know, I'm a professional educator, and in some of the training I had to become a teacher, we learned about how learning occurs. And what makes intelligence is how you make the connections. A brain cell is a neuron, and every time you connect that neuron to a fact, it creates a little string. And if you look at it, it starts to look like a spider web. And the more connections, the more dendrites, the more your brain grows, and you acquire more information and more knowledge. It's amazing how things continue to connect, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute. We have been on a 2-month study of material by Michael Newton. So if this is your first class and you don't know this material, I strongly advise you to get the book. The topic is what happens after death, that in-between period between incarnations. And it is fascinating because we're all going to experience it, right? No escaping that one, folks. We're all going there somewhere. And it really takes away any fear you have of death. And we have learned that the heaven world is so much more structured and wonderful and teaching than we ever dreamed. So I strongly recommend it. Mary Lynn's gotten very interested in these books. She said she's now read the first 3. I read this one in a day and a half. And then I quickly got on Amazon and ordered the yellow one, which is Destiny of Souls. And the third one, what's that one, Mary Lynn? Memories After Death. And that one, Michael Newton passed over about 10 years ago. And after he was gone, his research staff, because he developed the Michael Newton Institute, he copyrighted the phrase LBL, Life Between Lives. And his colleagues gathered together information from all the case studies, and there are thousands of them, They estimate that over 50,000 people have now had hypnotherapy sessions where they have gone into the super consciousness and tapped into what happens between lives. So if you weren't here for the last August and September class, they are on YouTube, and you can see them and stop them because they're over an hour long, more like an hour and a half, but you can pause and come back and so on if that's what you want to do. Or you can, look at something multiple times. As I'm getting ready to introduce another book today and connect it to a little bit of the material in Newton, I've started reading this again. And even though I read it for the first time about 6 weeks ago, it takes more than one exposure, people, to learn new information. The more complex the material, the more repetitions. Why do you think teachers start every year with review? Because you've been off all summer, they're calling up your prior knowledge, and they're laying the foundation to build on that background. So that's what good teaching is all about. So we are now going to segue into a book that I've not taught before, and I'll be really honest with you. I've had this book at home on the shelf for probably 6 or 7 years. And I had started it, but I had never read it cover to cover. The name of the book, as you can see, is The 5 Principles. And I'll give you a little background in a minute, but Ellen Debenport, now it's not Davenport, it's Debenport, is a Unity ordained minister, and she moved to Unity Village in the Kansas City area probably a decade ago. And she is now the director of publishing for Unity Worldwide. She was trained as a journalist, and she is a superb writer. This book it's a pleasure to read it. It's so easy to understand. And just when you're thinking of a question, in the next sentence, she asks the same question. So I think it's a real easy read, and yet the concepts are really deep. Ellen was actually a minister here in this building back in the 90s. At one time, we had 3 ministers. Ellen was here 8 years, head minister 6 of those 8. But she found that she really prefers the writing, and she's such a good writer. If you brought your book, you're welcome to thumb through it with me. I made a little list of pages that I want to refer to. So in the introduction, she talks about how this book came about. And we know here at Unity that Unity was founded in the 1800s by husband and wife, Charles and Myrtle Fillmore. And they had their center in the Kansas City area. And they never called it a church. It was a center. It was more like a study center. And one of the things that made it so well known was that Myrtle had tuberculosis. And she worked on healing techniques and actually cured herself. But it says that Unity was founded in 1889. So it's over 100 years now. And their great-granddaughter, Connie Fillmore Bazzi, became an ordained minister in our current lifetimes. And she wrote an article. And they asked her to talk about Unity principles. So Connie Fillmore, and this is on page 3 in your book, it was an article in the Daily Word, the little monthly magazine, okay? And the article was later incorporated into a booklet entitled The Key to the Kingdom, 5 Fundamentals of Truth. And that was published in 1990. But then that led to people studying them, and she condensed the material into what we have in this book, 5 basic principles. And the subtitle is A Guide to Practical Spirituality. So these principles really apply to any spiritual movement. They're not just for a particular church or approach. So that's all in the introduction to the book. All right. One of the very first things on page 9 that she talks about, and I've already mentioned this in prior classes, but I'll mention it again, and that's that a lot of people today don't feel comfortable with the word God. It's been used in so many different ways, and especially, I think, for the younger generations, it's kind of a turnoff. And I found a cross-reference in the Newton book, the first one, and let me turn to that. Now, to refresh your memory, Michael Newton was a hypnotherapist that did past life regressions, and he stumbled accidentally into some of his clients going beyond past lives into that part we've never heard about, the in-between lives. Where do we go? What happens? So he called that life between lives, and he even copyrighted that phrase. It's his, and he ended up doing thousands of regressions over the rest of his life. You read about these sessions, which last 3 to 4 hours when they were with Dr. Newton, and he, I'm sure, edits and takes out a lot of things that got off topic, but he boils down the basic information in those sessions. And we've spent 2 classes now talking about what happens. We've all heard of going through the tunnel at the moment of death, but then you don't hear much after that, right? So he takes it from crossing through that tunnel on through as long as that soul decides to remain in the heaven world, the spiritual world, the physical plane, the astral plane, and then the causal body ends up in our home in the spiritual world, which is the mental plane. So the word plane does not appear in these books. People, when they're under hypnosis, talk about zones and areas, but not necessarily planes. And that's one of the things you have to come to grips with when you study the material. We studied theosophy for 6 months. The vocabulary is different. Charles Ledbetter talked about the ego, but what I prefer and what my teacher taught me and what they talk about here is the soul. We're going to see in Ellen Debenport's book, she talks about the self with a capital S. That is also the same as the soul. So different vocabulary, you have to kind of learn how to align it so it's consistent. And that's not always easy. So I was talking about people's reluctance to use the word God. So in one of the Michael Newton sessions, which I have earmarked to tell you about, in this particular chapter in the Newton book, he is meeting with a high-level soul. Remember, he categorizes beginner souls into 2 categories, level 1 and 2, intermediate, advanced, and then very advanced. But he even gives you percentages. Most of his clients came from levels 1 and 2. And the way you're categorized is by how many lifetimes you've lived and how much experience you've had as a soul. So in this chapter, he's talking about one of his rare interviews with an advanced soul. Every soul has a spiritual higher power linked to its existence. All souls are the same as far as being divine essence. But they're not the same because of their development. We know that evolution is inevitable. We're all going to end up where we hope to be someday, but the speed at which you get there depends on your ambition, your background, your interest, all the karma you've accumulated, and so on. But we're all on the same path. I've compared it to being on a ladder. In this book, one of his clients talks about it being a train on the same track. And your cluster group that you're with in life after life, you'll all be in the same car. And when Newton asked that person who was under hypnosis, well, who's in the engine at the front? And you can imagine the answer, the source, of course. And that's the word used, not the word God, but the clients always use the word the source or the maker. And one of the things stressed in the reading for today is how to distinguish that from our traditional image of God. But in here on page 121, God is not He who is, but that which is. Those are simple words. Not one of those is a long vocabulary word, but boy, is that a difficult concept. God is not He. In fact, Debenport tells us in the book for today that every time we say he or she, we're doing what we call theism, like there's one great being, okay? When really God is everything and all. The subject says, the knowledge by which the energy of darker light is extended to us comes from the source. Our light is attached to the source. And Newton says, when you say source, you mean God? And the subject says, that word has been misused. How? By too much personalizing, which makes the source less than it is. What's wrong with us doing that? It takes the liberty of making the source too human, although we are all part of that oneness. The term God is not going to appear in these regressions in the Newton book. So now let's turn to what I assigned for today. I ask you in the 5 principles to read the first 55 pages, and those are about Principle 1 and Principle 2. On page 9, before she gets into the first principle, Ellen Debenport says, in my church, we began every Sunday service by saying that we honored, quote, the many names for God and the many paths to God. Yeah, I kind of can identify with that growing up. She says, I know a great many deeply spiritual people who firmly resist the word God. Please accept it in this book as a shorthand for all that is, the ultimate reality, the presence the human beings have sensed within and around them for millennia. I've used a variety of names and descriptions for the divine, but you may substitute whatever concepts or names that work for you. I also invite you to release any baggage or stereotypes the word God carries for you and open yourself to new understanding. Okay, Principle 1, if you have your book. God is absolute good, comma, everywhere present. That sounds so simple. God is everywhere present. She tells us about her childhood, and I'm older than Ellen Debenport, but I could still identify a lot with the way she said she learned about God as a child. I told you before, I grew up in a wonderful family in the Midwest. We went to church every Sunday. We went to Sunday school, we went to church, and in our small town, we even had a Sunday evening service. I also went to youth group when I got older. I went to vacation Bible school in the summer. And some of you are nodding, yep, been there. I know what you mean. And that's what Ellen experienced, except she grew up in a much more conservative fundamentalist church than I did. But she ended up with the same image. I thought God he always wore a white robe, and he was older. Jesus wore blue, but God wore white. That was in my head. And God had a beard and white hair, and he was just this brilliant maker and person. And Ellen uses a wonderful phrase. She calls him the Santa Claus God, keeping a list of who's naughty and nice, and watching everything you do. And for a long time, she said that's exactly what she believed. She says on page 15, my childhood view of God was an old man in the sky watching my every move. This God loved me, I was told, but this God refused to love anyone who didn't profess faith in Jesus and would send them to hell. Now, I wasn't told that in my church, but certain churches do teach that even now, that if you don't accept Jesus, you know, they're not going to honor Buddha or Muhammad or Zoroaster or any of the great leaders and teachers in other religions. Some churches say if you don't accept Jesus, and maybe you have to come up front to an altar and, you know, be blessed and rebaptized. And if you don't do that, you're doomed to hell. Well, I'm glad I didn't have to get rid of that concept in my head. But a lot of you may have had that taught to you growing up in a certain church. What we learned in the Newton material of people that literally have died and talk about what it was like, there is no hell. Hell is only created in your mind in the astral planes if you believe it exists. Your thought forms create heaven and hell. There is no place like that, just like there's no real death. So totally different what a lot of us learned as children to what we're learning here at Unity and other progressive spiritual movements. She describes what I think a lot of us can identify with. She had this childhood religion taught to her. She evidently lived in West Texas at the time, she says on page 16. In college, I abandoned church and its teachings about God as I understood them. A lot of people go through that period of doubt, and in fact, it's healthy in many cases to question. I don't know if I always believed, but I know when I got into college, I had a lot more questions. I didn't go to the hometown church anymore. I sometimes went to the one on campus, sometimes not. But I think that's very common. I've seen that with my children and stepchildren that are adults. Most of them don't go to church at all now. That seems to be a very current trend in the United States. A lot of young adults, teenagers, young adults, even young families don't go to church anymore. And you know, why is that? I think people got burned out on dogma and they got turned off by, and that's why so many of us have found our way to Unity, because Unity is dogmaless. I just invented that word. We don't have all these rules that you have to follow and then say if you don't do those rules, you're doomed to hell, because we don't even acknowledge hell. We don't believe in original sin at Unity. We accept the concept of original blessing. The concept that a baby, an infant, is born and is full of sin, it's just hard for those of us in this room to even comprehend. Ellen uses that term, original blessing, and she said she didn't know who to credit it with. The first time I heard that phrase was Bishop Spong from the Episcopal Church, and he has spoken here at our church several times over the last 25 years. And he helped give feedback to Ellen about her book. There's some quotes from him on the back of the book or somewhere in here. So she ran a lot of the content by him. I think he has passed over now. I don't think he's still in the physical world, if I recall. But Bishop Spong was one that really talked, and he traveled and spoke at a lot of churches about original blessing. God for grown-ups. I just love that phrase. That's what makes her book so readable. I'm on page 17. She says, I know now that my story's fairly typical, except that the emptiness seemed to be setting in sooner with each generation that gives up on church and God. And she mentions in here that a lot of people, when they throw away the background with all the dogma, they throw everything away. They think that's the only way a church can exist, is with all these rules that no longer feel right. And so they just quit altogether. But what they need to do, and I hope those of you that are listening out there can do this, is search and find the right spiritual group for you. Unity is such a place, and there are unity groups and communities all over the United States and even in other countries. But a lot of young people, we know the suicide rate is up, the anxiety levels are up, and I think there's so many younger people that don't feel like they have a spiritual core. They don't know that God is within. It's not even occurred to them. And they'll tell you, and I've had it said to me, that I have a family member I've told you about before, that he calls my belief system my fairy tale. And that's okay if he wants to say that, he can say that. But I also told him I was going to be waiting when he crossed over. But anyway, it's true. I just can't wait. But anyway, so many people are like that, though. They think, I told you I have a friend my age who has been grieving for a year over the death of her sister and brother-in-law who died very close together, and she was so close to them, adored both of them. And I tried to talk to her a little bit about, I said, you really are going to be seeing them again and again. She said, I don't believe any of that stuff. No, and she's the same age I am, so it's not all just the younger generation. There are people of all different ages that don't believe in anything outside of the here and now. And I don't know, I just have so many questions that can't be answered without some sort of a belief system. They really think there was just some explosion and all this happened? And when you look at nature and how systematic everything is and how planned, you can look at the human body, just look at your hand, and all this came from some big, great explosion that doesn't fit my thinking. But there are a lot of people that believe in the Big Bang Theory. On the bottom of 16, I spent 20 years without a spiritual rudder. That might have guided me through early adulthood. By 40, I was professionally successful, financially secure, and spiritually empty. Yep. And that describes maybe some of you here, definitely some of you listening out there. And she says she thinks this is happening earlier and earlier. Life has gotten much more complicated than when I was growing up, with all the technology and social media and so on. So many stimuli and things happening, and it's a very tough thing. We're very brave to be on this planet, to choose to come in and face all the turmoil. But what she talks about is her turning point. I have talked about it with you all earlier. For me, it was, is this all there is? That Peggy Lee song in the early 1980s. Actually, I was born a believer. I've never not believed in my life, but I hadn't found a way to get to the depth of understanding that I longed for. I knew I came from somewhere else. I'd look out at night at the sky and kind of longed to be out there, and I just had so many questions. And that was when I started going to the public library looking for things. Like I started, like some of you did, with Edgar Cayce. I read the Ruth Montgomery books. There was things coming out more and more and more. And what we found when we were studying theosophy was that after World War II, the spiritual hierarchy made a decision to start bringing the ancient wisdom out. Now, how did it get hidden? Because of what happened in Atlantis. After the Atlanteans practically destroyed the whole planet because of misuse of technology, all the teachings went underground. And the only way you could find out any of the information that's pretty much available today is by finding a mystery school. And they were called mystery schools because They were a mystery. You had to find them. They were hidden. And you only learned about them through word of mouth. Maybe, you have a good friend and you start asking some questions and that friend says, well, there's a group that, and then you find your way. And even when I was on my big search all through the late 60s and early 70s when I was a young mother, the material was still very difficult to find. I went to the public library, read everything I could. One book would lead me to the next, but I really wanted a teacher, and I couldn't find one anywhere until I found her through a Ruth Montgomery book, and I've told you all this before. In I'm going to say maybe 82 or 83, Ruth Montgomery published one of her books on Strangers Among Us, was the title of it. And every chapter was a different figure that was a walk-in, an advanced one that came in, took a shortcut into a body. Somebody that wanted out and kept behind the veil of sleep saying, I just don't want to be here anymore, and so on. There was an exchange made. And that incoming soul was able to skip over several decades of childhood and come in at an adult level. They were called walk-ins. Anwar Sadat was in a walk-in, according to that book. My teacher, Carol Parrish Harrow, was a walk-in. At one point in one of the Newton books, he says he didn't think walk-ins existed because he had not run into one at the time. But when I had my past life LBL session, that therapist told me that Newton, he made a lot of mistakes in some of his earlier thinking because he was learning as he went. And so some of the things he thought, no, that couldn't be. Well, I'll give you an example for me. I've never really thought parallel lives could be actual until recently, and the things I'm reading about how the soul actually splits and can split. You always leave part of your soul in your heaven world cluster group. So you choose, when you choose an incarnation, how much of your energy, which is your God force, you're going to take into that life. And what remains in your cluster group is dormant. But you can also, must be really confusing, you can also decide to split that energy into more than one life at a time. Wow. One's hard enough, isn't it? In fact, I was rereading last night a client that Newton had that was leading 3 lives simultaneously. Why would somebody pick that? In fact, Newton said, why? And the person answered, because I wanted to accelerate my growth and learn more lessons quickly. But, that's a choice. Everything's a choice, okay? So, let's keep going with principle 1, God is absolute. And I'm now on pages 20 and 21. She talks about if you really accept that God is everything and everywhere and we are, then that word theism is not the correct term. Principle 1 affirms that God is all there is. God is omnipotent, omniscient, and omnipresent. Not all powerful, but all power. Not all knowing, but all knowledge, and present everywhere. God is the stars, the rocks, the animals, the people. God is the love, the creativity, the wisdom that human beings express. All that we are and have is God, and we can never be separate from that universal power. And she goes on further on page 20 to talk about the word theism describes a concept of God external to our life. So if the minute we say even Mother, Father, God, we're humanizing. And that's theism. And boy, I'll have to retrain myself on that because we're so used to thinking of God as a he or a she, or I like Mother, Father, God. But that's giving human quality and acting like there's one separate figure. So that's kind of outdated, according to what Debenport talks about. And now she's going to quote Bishop Spong on page 21. The theistic God is seen as a being supernatural in power, dwelling outside this world and able to invade the world in miraculous ways, to bless, to punish, to accomplish divine will, to answer prayers, come to the aid of frail, powerless human beings. The 5 principles challenge every aspect of theism: what God is, what human beings are, how the two relate, how prayer works, and how we're expected to live as human beings. So that's one of the big takeaways from this first principle. And like I said, the words are simple, but the concept is going to take a lot of adjustments in our head to move away from theism and accept this. God is within, and I think we've all been moving in that direction. We've talked before about when you know something, you hear people talk about that gut feeling, or the third eye when you meditate. The answers really are there because we are part of God. And the reason I want to connect it to the Newton material, we learned that souls are still being created. And when they're born, they're called a monad, right? Monad is a spark of God. It's a spark of energy because God is energy. So we really physically do have God within because that soul, we're souls, we're not bodies. We're souls wearing a body. So that spark of the source, God, if you want to use that word, is really physically part of your DNA. Okay, we are born with that and it's in us. So all this looking out here to find all the answers, no, you need to look in here. And dreams, meditation are a really good way of doing that and getting started. I told you about my going for my own hypnotherapy session in August. And one of the big takeaways that I had from that session, things that I've always thought were kind of just my intuition or imagination, I now realize, oh, those were truths. Those were real. That was my soul giving me information. It wasn't just some fairy tale or something made up. It's authentic. So there's somewhere in one of these 2 books, they talk about you have to make a big decision. Which, do I do this or do I do that? The best way is to go with the one that feels right. Feeling, sensing. And I've talked to you about the challenge of using your mental ability to discern truth. Okay? I had somebody recently ask me if I'd read a certain book by a certain author. And the minute that author's name came up, I kind of had a hesitation. And I remembered when I first learned about that writer 20-something years ago, as I looked at some of the material, it just didn't feel right. So I never went with that particular source. So you have to discern on your own if something feels right. And that goes with teachers, gurus, people that claim to be mystics and this and that. If you don't feel right about it, walk away. Find something that does feel like the right thing for you. One of the things that she talks about also in this chapter is that God is not, you shouldn't think of God as like your personal Santa Claus. So many people think God's going to root for one football team over another or tell you what to do. And what you really need to do is go within. And that's why one of the first things new students to spirituality are told is know thyself. Learn about your inner self. And you need to find times to be quiet and introspective, meditation, walks in nature, whatever is your way to filter out all the background noise and to learn. I've been paying more and more attention to my dreams. Those can be very helpful and symbolic. And people say, oh, I don't dream. Tom has an interesting story about that because he had a teacher in the workplace that when he and I have compared, this man that came to IBM to teach business groups, he was an advanced one. And his teachings were not that different than what I was learning from a spiritual teacher. But he told students to pay attention to their dreams. And Tom said, I told him, I don't remember any dreams. I don't think I dream. So he said, keep a sheet of paper on your bedside. And when you wake up, whether it's in the middle of the night or the first thing in the morning, jot down something on that paper that'll help you remember. And Tom said when he woke up the next morning, he was shocked to find things written on his piece of paper. So Carol, my teacher, used to say, the minute you step out of bed in the morning, your dreams fall out of the bottoms of your feet. So, but if you can wake up and not jump up out of bed real quickly, and usually, and the more you practice this, the more it'll happen, you might have a fragment of a memory of something. So kind of rehearse it in your head for a few minutes. Oh yeah, I was dreaming that I have more dreams about air flight and missing planes and doing this kind of thing. So I try to piece it back together and look at what it symbolizes. And if you want to keep that kind of a journal and did what Tom did and jot things down, how long did you do that and write them down? Forever.
Since that moment.
Yeah. But it really does help because even if it's just one word, let's say you dreamed about being chaste, because you told me you had one like that, then just write chaste and that'll trigger it and you'll be able to recall it more. Okay, wonderful comment. I'll repeat it for the audience. Billy said before she falls asleep at night, okay, I like that. She's not asking, she's thanking God for showing her in dreams what she's not seeing in everyday life. That's wonderful, I love that. So there's lots of ways. I too have trained myself when I go into the bedroom to go to bed and turn the lights off. A lot of you do a daily review, and I've done that, but really what I'm doing more now is programming myself for what I need. I ask teachers to come forth and help me, especially on a night before a class like this. I was out walking my dog when it was barely light this morning, and I always do a lot of family healing list and prayers, and I'm asking my guides and teachers to be with me for this class, to guide me in the words that I say so that I avoid misstatements and that I can help open all of us to more learning. So I do that at night. I ask to be taken to the Hall of Learning or the Hall of Knowledge, both which exist in the mental plane. Let me, and I like your eyes way better. Act like it's already happened. Thank you for taking me to the Hall of Learning and the Hall of Knowledge. Thank you for helping me remember. That's another thing I thank you for guiding me in doing what I came to do and being who I came to be. We've talked about this before. We all came with a life contract, a spiritual contract, and we chose it. Our guide in the inner planes helped us maybe kind of put it into words, and we came in with that contract. And so we want to keep checking to make sure we're on track with what we planned for this life. Think about that, and we'll take a 5-minute break. People would come up to her and ask about was, okay, if we're God and God is everywhere, then how do you explain all the bad things that happen? How can there be evil? How can there be a Hitler, Osama bin Laden? And we've talked about this a little bit before. I suggested to you that if we had never had Judas betray Jesus, we would have never had what happened as a result, the resurrection and all that happened after he was crucified. So there's a lesson there for us to not judge. And I have to remind myself of that all the time, especially in the climate we live in right now with everything so divided as a nation. It's really easy to get angry and make judgments about this person, what they're saying on one channel and another person on another. So anyway, judgment is not a good thing, because often a person has volunteered to come in and play the role of the villain. Remember, life is a play, and we're watching each life from the spiritual plane, and we're going to have to go back and report on it when we check in. So try to avoid judgment. But when Ellen Debenport was asked about evil, I just loved the possibilities of her explanation. So top of 26. The question of evil's existence has been asked for millennia, has been wrestled with by theologians, students, clergy, and ordinary people who are suffering, and humans still don't have a definitive answer. But this list sorts out some possibilities. So this is what Ellen came up with to explain evil, and I think she's on to some really good points. Her first point: humans were created with free will and we make mistakes. Second point: good and evil are simply labels that human gives to events based on our opinions at the time. Wow.
So what we think.
Yeah, we look at something, oh, that's just awful, it's this and that, and maybe it had to happen for other things to fall into place. So we are filtering the way we interpret things through our own consciousness and expectations. So I thought that was good. Her third point: the human species is immature. An Aramaic word that became evil in the Bible is bisha, which means immature or unripe. She's saying that we as humans are immature or unripe, and we haven't yet learned to live up to our consciousness. Okay. Next point: we can't see the big picture. That kind of ties in with that judgment thing. Now that we're 2,000 years back, we can see the big picture about Judas and what he did and why. But at the time when it was all unfolding, it appeared that he was evil, right? So again, the big picture. Another point: we're creating our world through consciousness. That's the principle 3 we'll do next month, which most people do not realize, much less know how to handle. In other words, thought forms and how we create things. We'll be studying that next month. At the top of 27, what we call evil is an expression of mass consciousness. Whoa. We all contribute to it through our angry and violent thoughts, the energetic vibrations we pour into the one mind, capitalized, in other words, the source. The energy inevitably expresses somewhere, just as an erupting volcano releases heat from the earth. And her final point on evil: we're balancing the events of a past life, sometimes called karma. This is not so much punishment or reward as reconciling accounts and offering an opportunity to experience life from all sides. These theories reflect the imperfection of human beings, but not the existence of a force of evil. If God is all that is, then there can be no other power. No devil, no Satan, no adversary doing battle for our souls or luring us to the dark side. If God is absolute good, then what we consider evil cannot be real or permanent. Understand it can be painful, but it stems from humans' misuse of spiritual law, not from an evil entity that overtakes us. war, terrorism, crime, starvation, ignorance, and destructive competition for resources are human constructs based on fear, arrogance, and greed. One of the things that I introduced in one of the very first classes, probably around a year ago, last October or November, was the fact that about initiations, and how not only do humans go through the human initiations, or those are stages of development, and with each stage you increase your vibratory rate. And the higher your vibratory rate, the more you plug in with the higher vibrations of the universe. And not only should we work on ourselves, but as a collective, we need to be raising the vibratory rate of planet Earth. Planet Earth has been called a remedial planet. And when you come to Roger's classes that are starting up soon, you'll learn, and I'm learning along with you, a lot about how we got to be this 37th remedial planet, that the whole universe is cheering, come on humans, come on Earth, you can do it. And we need to raise the level. And we learned in that class that we've been living in the third dimension during the patriarchal age. And we're now in the transition period, which is very difficult, very painful. But there's now a lot of people on the planet that have done the work and raised their level. You're among that group, people. And what our challenge is to help others get there. One of the gurus 25 years ago talked about every human being was a brain cell for planet Earth. Think about that. Then we need the majority of brain cells to have raised the individual vibratory rate so that planet Mother Gaia, planet Earth, can be raised to the fifth dimension. That's why there's so much extraterrestrial activity going on. We'll get in that with other classes. Derek's going to help me a lot with that. But you're not imagining it. There are things happening. The government certainly doesn't want you to think about it. How many of you have had a personal experience with any kind of ET thing? Oh, come on. I'm not the only one. Derek, I know you have. And yeah, I mean, I won't go into it. There's not time today. But I've had so many things happen that there are no other explanations for. And I'll be happy to share it in another class when we're on that topic. But they're not, the extraterrestrials, I just got through studying some very advanced material that I can hardly get my mind around that says just in our system, which is called Centania, there are over 600 populated planets. Yeah, that's what? Yeah, and in existence, there's more than 3 million populated planets. It's almost hysterically funny that we think we're it. You know, oh yeah, this little messed up place, this is God's best work. No. So learning more about the greater scale of things, I mean, it's complicated, but it's also so reassuring. And the ones that are coming in are here to help. I mean, they're so much more advanced than human life. If they wanted to be mean and ugly and have lasers and zap you, I mean, that could be done. It's much more like E.T. and Close Encounters. You know, good things and people that are here to help, that are wonderful beings. And they're trying to help us jump start our planet so that we will make our fifth dimension graduation. And then Earth will be a sacred planet like so many others. See, you have to, one more thing before I get back on the topic. The planets that have already reached the fifth level are invisible to us because we're not at that level yet. So there are thousands of invisible planets. Remember I told you to look at a ceiling fan? The faster it rotates, you can't see the blades anymore. It becomes invisible. So the planets that are at a very high level are invisible to us when we're in the human body and living in this third dimensional world, which is trying to morph to the fifth dimension. So that's just a preview of coming attractions. Let me just say one more thing about evil. To grant evil a power of its own would be to accept it as inevitable. So one of the things I was taught by my teacher, and I think a lot of you already know this, if you give a lot of mental energy to something negative, you empower it. So I can remember I was told this with healing work. Let's say you hear that person X has a terminal illness. And everybody's, oh, it's just awful. And the more it's talked about and spread among everybody, energizing that illness, it's going to manifest at a faster rate. So you have to retrain yourself not to get off on these tangents. And believe me, I've done enough political ranting in the last election that I've had to call myself back off the ledge and look at it as Roger told me. Just look, everything is playing out as it's supposed to. It doesn't do any good to get, all negative and rant and rave. It just energizes. If you ever read Madeleine L'Engle's book, A Wrinkle in Time, which won a Newbery for Best Children's Works more than 50 years ago, it's about a girl named Meg. Her dad's an astrophysicist, and Meg has a little brother who's a genius. Meg's about 14, little brother's about 7 or 8. Anyway, they find out the reason their father has disappeared from the family and been gone for several years, he is trapped in space with this black being called It. Okay, so it's just a big black glob. It's just the worst thing in the world. So Meg and her little brother, through a whole series of events, they end up going to that location in space to rescue her father. And of course, they're furious, this horrible thing. And so they're fighting with negative and weapons, and they're sending all these negative thoughts. And it finally occurs to them the only way their father can be released is to send love. And so they start beaming love, and sure enough, it disappears and their father is able to come back home. So all of that was written, that book came out more than 50 years ago. And when you look at it, the symbolism in it, you think, wow, that's pretty strong. If you find something popping out of your mouth that's negative, believe it or not, our teacher taught us to say cancel, cancel, and it's gone. Yeah. So you can cancel something like, oh my gosh, why did I say that? Cancel, cancel. And there's a lot, our thoughts, and that's principle 3, we're going to get into that more. We create things with our thinking. So learning to monitor your thinking and stay on the high road is not easy. I loved Michelle Obama. When they go low, I go high. And wasn't it Fillmore that says, take it to the attic in the books? In other words, I was taught the most evolved person in a group has a responsibility to take the high road. So, when you start to get snarky and ugly and have negative thoughts, take the high road, go to the attic. Carol's question was, what do I mean by taking the high road? I can give you a really silly little example. I was playing bridge 2 or 3 days ago, and 2 people at 2 different bridge tables that were close together, they started yelling at each other over something. And here I am. I said, just calm down. Everybody just calm down and take a breath. Turn around, and I guess it's the school teacher in me. But anyway, there's times when you just have to bring calm to a group. because some of the little petty things like that one, it was so silly. But I have to tell myself this when I start to get too anxious or preachy about stuff on the news or, that kind of thing. It is not easy to monitor your own behavior. But taking the high road, some of you have contacted me about conflicts with family or this person or that person. It gets to a point, you're not going to change that other person. You have to say, I love you, but I can't be involved in this anymore. And you learn to make your family the community that, like this one, the ones you feel the most comfortable with that share the same values. Alice Bailey even wrote in her books, I came across it getting ready for today, that once our children reach adulthood, you have to let go and let them make their own mistakes and learn their own lessons. You can't continue to control adult children. And usually, and I'm a mother like a lot of you are, you do it out of love. Oh, I don't want my child to get hurt, so, I'll do this. And no, you usually don't learn lessons when things are all smoothed out or when somebody takes care of it for you. So we have to learn what is ours to do. And if you're around hateful family members that are dragging you down, I would just not be around them anymore, And a lot of us have people in our families that aren't easy to deal with. So that's what I mean by taking the high road. Sometimes the high road is, look, I love you, but this isn't mine to deal with, Or you can mediate if you need to, whatever comes up. We reinforce the principle that what we focus on grows. So if you focus on negative things and on an illness or some figure, politician or something that you don't like, that kind of focus on it is going to enhance it and make it grow. Yes, Carol?
What do you say to yourself to get out of that?
Just what I'm saying to you all. Okay, get a grip, Nancy. This is just a play. This has to happen. I'm supposed to be here now. I volunteered for this. I see what's going on. What?
It's all in divine order.
Yeah, that's the unity answer. Everything's in divine order. And sometimes you think, this is divine order? But we don't see the big picture at the time we're in the middle of the muck. And we're in the middle of the muck right now. So, but everything, all the spiritual things that I'm reading and hearing, and it's going to get better, but it's still going to be a few more years. I'm sorry. But, and one of these books, they really were complimenting those of us that have volunteered to come in and live right now. Well, thank you. I appreciate it. Because it takes a lot of strength to be here right now. And there's so many other planets that are evidently just wonderful. And maybe next incarnation we'll pick one of those and go rest and have fun. But the other little catch is you can't exit Earth until you've neutralized your karma. So as much as I heard somebody recently here at Unity said, I'm really working hard, I don't want to come back here next time. And I thought, well, good luck with that one. I mean, a lot of us have thought that. I remember my mother saying that one time. She said, I don't want to come back. When I told her about reincarnation, she said, maybe I'll be a lap dog. And I said, well, she did. My mother said that. Okay, let's go on then. On 32, the last paragraph of that lesson for Principle 1, God does not ride to the rescue. What we call God is a force of energy, not a supernatural being that intervenes in our lives. The tough stuff you're dealing with, you signed up for it. That's why we're here. Here's Principle 2 on page 35. Human beings have a spark of divinity within them, the Christ spirit within. Their very essence is of God, and therefore they are inherently good. And I wrote in my book, monad, that word that I told you last month that is the word for an embryo soul, that little spark of God or the Creator that creates a soul is called the monad. And it physically exists in your DNA because you brought a portion of your soul with you when you incarnated. Not all of it. You chose with your guides when you met in the inner planes to plan this incarnation. You chose the life. They gave you some choices and you picked one. Probably picked one that would help you fulfill karmic debts. And you picked your family, where you were going to live, your gender, your race. So you knew all of this when you were planning. And you knew it was going to be a tough, tough ride. But then you go through the birth canal and that old amnesia kicks in. And you get here and you don't remember any of that. And you think, well, what am I doing here? Why? And all these doubts and questions come up. And you know people that say it all the time. I didn't ask to be born. You only go around once in life and all those kind of things that are not true. But that's because to make it more of a challenge for us to develop and learn lessons, the amnesia was created so that we don't have that memory. You have to work and dig to find it. And that's why working through meditation and getting to know the inner you will help you realize what your life contract is. And I've challenged all of you. That's really important to figure out why you chose to come. And what is your role right now? Are you doing it? And it doesn't have to be big. It can be, most karmic lessons are neutralized in small doses, not one big, oh my gosh, I saved 15 people from a burning building. That's probably not the way it's going to work out. But figure out who you are and why you're here. And when you do your daily affirmations, ask for or give thanks for knowing what you came to know and doing what you came to do. With Principle 1, we broaden our understanding of God to a field of love and intelligence that's the foundation of the universe. Okay, that was the one we just read. With Principle 2, further down, it merely has been relocated, inside you as you. So that God principle is inside you as you. It took years for me to understand a new concept of self, capital S-E-L-F, in which I am an expression of God. So there you can see that self is the same as soul. It helped when I formed a new concept of God that is both transcendent, meaning all there everywhere, and eminent, personal, within. And she uses a comparison of the ocean and the waves and being part of the water. We are the divine, on the next page, expressing in human form. Now, all we're dealing with, because it's plenty, is lessons on human incarnations, human initiations. There's so many others, and the soul can go to different planets and live in different kind of bodies, but we're probably not going to know much about that. At least I'm not going to know much about that. It's enough to try to figure this planet out and our roles here. In this chapter, something that I've thought for a long time, what we have done with Jesus was not what was intended. Jesus did not come into a human life to start a religion. He came to model what a human life can be, what we can all be. Yes, he was the Son of God, but so are each of us sons and daughters of God, sparks of the one. In the middle of 41, the same divine essence Jesus had dwells in each of us, imperfect as we are. So we all have that same potential. Let's keep going on. On 42, 2/3 of the way down, Jesus was not asking to be worshiped. He was showing us who we are and what we can do. He repeatedly expressed frustration that his disciples didn't get it. When his disciples could not cure an epileptic boy, Jesus explained in exasperation, "You faithless and perverse generation, how much longer must I be with you? How much longer must I put up with you?" His final words of forgiveness on the cross, "They do not know what they're doing." Remember, forgive them for they know not what they do. It's right there out of the Bible. On the next page, 43, right above the heading, our job as humans is to revive the spiritual truth in the world and to live from the Christ of our being, the part of us that is God, our divine core. That's our job, to revive the spiritual truth in the world, live from the Christ of our inner being. And then there's a whole section called, "What if God were one of us?" Guess what? Is. Right? If we're all God, then God is right here in this room as one of us. Knowing I can rely on this divine self is not an exaggerated sense of my own powers. It's just the opposite. It's humbly turning to the divine within for insight and wisdom. On 45, near in the second big paragraph, the soul is part of the eternal you, and she capitalized that. Anytime it's capitalized, you know she's talking about the spiritual self. The soul is part of the eternal you that has come to earth for a human experience, built a physical body, and begun to operate on this planet through the ego. The ego is the human brain and that part of ourselves. And she compares the bodies to those stacked dolls where you have a big one and a little one, they're inside of each other. You do not have a soul. You are a soul that has a body and an ego or personality. On 46, we will never be egoless. We need our egos to function, but we can put the ego in service to the soul. So, my teacher used to say, work on being a soul-infused personality. Soul-infused. Let that soul control more of your personality than ego. Okay? All right, I think we've about reached the end. I think I'm reaching my end. I'm starting to feel pretty worn out. And I think that's a lot for us to think about. Next class will be the next two principles. Principle 3 and 4. All right, thank you for being here.